Okay, welcome once again. I'm glad that you're here. We're going to start with a meditation time for this Dharma session. So I'm going to encourage you to find a comfortable seat according to your body and your body's needs. Hi to Maria. It's so nice to see you. Really so joyful to see you. So please come into your comfortable upright seat for yourself. You're welcome to close your eyes. If you'd like, you can also remove your glasses for those of you who are wearing glasses. Lengthen your spine, but relax your shoulder blades down your upper back. Make a tiny lift to the center of your heart, but relax your eyebrows down. And welcome your breathing to drop down into your abdomen, so into the pelvic basin. And as you drop the breath down or allow it to drop down into the pelvis, don't make any particular effort to move the breath or to coordinate anything, and be in a kind of mode of surrender for the time being. So as you rest in the present moment here, no other moment is available to you. You may find that the mind doesn't easily come to the present moment, even though your body is here. And so giving the mind places to lightly connect to the here and now can be helpful in training our minds on how to be present. So place your mind between your eyebrows and practice relaxing the space between the two eyebrows. Invite that space to get wider and softer. Notice the sensations associated with softening the space between your eyebrows. And then relax the eyebrows themselves and let your mind stay present there. The softening of the eyebrows. Bring your awareness to the outer corners of the eyes. Invite them to relax and notice the specific sensations. And invite your eyelids to get heavier and more relaxed. In each of these touch points, there are sensations of letting go. You might also feel the sensations of holding on, the recognition that your body goes back to a holding pattern and may need a reminder to let go, to let go, and then to let go once again. Now imagine your eyes becoming more still, as they have the capacity to help also create mental stillness. And if you simply lightly concentrate on relaxing from the center of the eyebrows, around the entire circumference of your eyes, and even asking the eyes to be still, that concentration is enough and will help to bring your mind more and more into the present. So any moment you notice that the eyes harden or there's a flinch, or if your mind wanders and then you realize that when you come back to the eyes, you have to relax them again. So all of this is in the realm of practice. We are practicing coming into the present moment. As you consistently practice this kind of softening, this letting go, of course, you'll notice when your body doesn't let go, when it comes back to hardening or flinching. But for every time that you're returning to the letting go practice, count that as a success that you've returned. You can practice even more softly, relaxing the eyes, the eyelids. So invite your effort to become more and more elegant. Even if you have to practice returning to the surrender countless times, every effort to return has value. Sensing the quality of your efforts and also the tone of the inner voice in responding to your efforts. Start to back your awareness up behind the inner voice, behind the efforts, to sense that which is bringing attention through you. There's you making the effort. There's likely you commenting to yourself about your effort. So back up even further to sense the awareness principle itself that gives light to your attention. A sense of backing up or tracing your attention back to awareness itself would be as if the light bulb were meditating and it would realize it is connected to the lamp, and the lamp is connected to the cord, and the cord is connected to the outlet, and the outlet is connected to a much larger source. The lamp would not mistake itself for that source, but it would delight in being lit up. And so as you trace your attention back to awareness, you can sense that it is that presence or force that lights up your ability for attention. Please raise your hands to your heart. Thank you very much for sharing this practice time. You may bow your head to your heart. And then release your hands. You're welcome to open your eyes. I hope you found that to be restful. You might have had, sometimes people have this experience as if they were perhaps driving on the freeway, and then here in Oregon we have, when you're about to cross a certain lane, you get these bumps, so you can hear the cars crossing a lane, and then there's a whole nother lane of ridges before you get to the breakdown lane, and so it tells you, oh, you're going off the road here. So you might have had this experience of The mind is going like the freeway, all these different directions. I'm asking you to pay attention. You're finding the habits are strong. Maybe they're stronger than attention. Maybe you crossed the bumps or the breakdown lane a couple times, and hopefully you then found yourself pulling off the freeway and being able to rest, being able to keep it simple. One thing that often happens when people are learning to meditate or beginning to meditate, they give themselves a hard time about how well they're doing with their meditation, as if there's a constant scrutinizer or evaluator. I sometimes refer to that as the heckler in the balcony. My only real experience of hecklers is from the Muppet Show, which tells you how long ago that is for me. But the hecklers in the balcony of your meditation that are evaluating, scrutinizing, all these things, they're simply unhelpful. They aren't there to help you have an elegant approach to your meditation. They're mostly there to interrupt, and it can start to feel a little bit harassing when that's happening. So in this regard, what you can consider is you're practicing meditation, and it can help to have the tools for concentration on the way to meditation. So the act of concentration in yoga is called dharana, and it precedes the experience of meditation called dhyana. This is in the 8 limbs of yoga. So dharana comes, and then dhyana is possible, according to the Yoga Sutras and the 8 limbs. What precedes dharana, before we even get to that limb, is pratyahara, which means a kind of refinement of or a turning inward of your senses. So that refining or turning inward process is what we were doing there with relaxing the eyes. And while that is a sense organ, we also have the skin, it's a sense organ. We had the opportunity to watch the eyes soften and flinch, or soften and flinch. So whatever choice we make for a mindfulness practice, the tool to concentrate on, the honing of the senses, whatever choice we make, it's also acting like a looking glass. We get to see ourselves in the reflection of the efforts. And that is sometimes where you get the glimpse of how loud your inner critic is. But my hope for you in the practice is that you also start to glimpse how benevolent your inner presence is. And that becomes louder, as it were, than the inner critic. This intention for benevolence becomes more overarching. We call it a benevolent presence, or a loving presence. So in the spirit of that, when we have a practice of meditation using the senses, we are really addressing what's called the manomaya kosha. Of the 5 layers of the koshas in yoga, there at the manomaya kosha, we have what's called the animal mind, the manas. And the animal mind has these senses attached to it, and the senses can cause the animal mind to go hither and thither. As you know, if you have a pet, that they can go hither and thither. Sometimes it's like a spider, and oh my God, it's a huge cat attack. Or the smell of a certain food that they must have, that they're napping one moment and then they hear the crinkle of a bag in the kitchen and they're on it to come get a treat. Unfortunately, it wasn't a treat, it was like something else you were unwrapping, but they heard and then they imagined and then they came on a pattern to get the treat. So if the manas, the manomaya kosha, is constantly directing us, it flows outwards into the pranamaya kosha and the annamaya kosha. And I'll explain this in a few moments, what is the pathway here. But you can imagine that if our senses are constantly driving us, and then the mind affects the energy body and that affects the physical body, we have what's called an external or outward pathway. Whereas once we connect with the manomaya kosha and we have a deeper relationship with the manomaya kosha, it's actually the chance to go more deeply inward. So from manomaya kosha, we go in towards vijnanamaya kosha, inner wisdom and presence. And from vijnanamaya kosha, we go inward towards anandamaya kosha. Right, so we're taking the journey inward versus the journey outward. And meditation is an inward journey, as they say. Meditation is an inside job, right? Versus other ways of being in the world, more of an outside job. So having this leadership at the panchamaya kosha is really essential, and regaining that is going to influence then how we take care of our pranamaya kosha, our energy body, and how we take care of the annamaya kosha, the physical body. And so I sometimes say, and I mean this in all sincerity, because of course in my own life I've had many chances for symptoms. So if you have the symptoms of dis-ease or suffering, if you have the symptoms of difficulties, those symptoms can act like signposts on the road, pointing you in a direction that you're intended to be sent. I'm smelling something in the kitchen, and I want to check if anybody's using the kitchen and anything's burning. Just a moment, please. That's a good use of the senses, right? Just a moment. It must be my neighbor's house. It's not inside here. So what I'm speaking to here is if you have the symptoms of fatigue, a headache, burnout, anxiety, distress, difficulty concentrating, you have all these symptoms going on, your annamaya kosha, your physical body, is broadcasting to you a signal that it's time to turn inward. It's time to perhaps to slow down or to reconnect to your body to find out, wow, how am I creating or co-creating these symptoms? And to have the inner sense that we are creating or co-creating our symptoms is a real shift of perspective in our society, because generally when you live from the panchamaya kosha outwards, it's all externalized, we'll tend to also blame our symptoms on the external. And for sure, being in a stressful environment, being in a busy marketplace, being caught in traffic, being caught in the airport, let's say overnight. I hope that doesn't happen for you, Karen, but being in these situations, there are stressors that happen. But the internal sanctuary that we create with yoga can give us some refuge or leadership, or not getting caught up in the fray. So I like to say it that way. We're not going to get caught up in that fray. However, of course, we're living our lives, and we do things from time to time that go against our nature. We eat standing up. We eat on the go. We make phone calls while driving. I hope you're not doing that, but I do see people doing it. We go against our nature. We get overscheduled. We add too much to the calendar. We have a lot of self-talk going on, so the mind is kind of burning out at the same time. And then we start having the symptoms of going against our nature. And then some part of us rises up and says, yeah, but I have to do it for these reasons. There's a kind of justifying self in there too, that justifies why we're doing these things. And usually those justifications are based on survival needs, like having a relationship feel preserved, or surviving some quandary in a relationship, or survival like having the paycheck or the resources to live your life. Or the brain that's promoting survival is caught in a fight or flight signal, and it can't turn it off effectively. So we see everything through the lens of fight or flight. And when our brain is seeing through that lens, it's also confirming for itself the reality that it is seeing, which is very hard to tell ourselves or somebody else, because when we're in that kind of distress, we don't want to hear something inappropriate like that's in your head, because it's actually including the whole body. The fight or flight mechanism is a whole physiological rush at the body. And if our system gets toggled on to that fight or flight and it can't turn off, then it is generating the symptoms that are causing so much distress. And even if our mind tries to be better or more cunning or more savvy about our circumstances, the body will often win in that case. Partly because the cunning or strategic or savvy mind, as one of those great wisdom scientists said, you can't solve a problem with the same mind that created it. And so looking at that whole construct, if we take ourselves, then here we are in the present, arriving in today, year 2023. But if we look back through the timeline of our life with a gentle cascading glance back, we could see that there was also a developmental period in our life. And that developmental period, we were completely porous. We were soaking in whatever was around us. Our senses were wide open and porous. And we soaked in feeling loved or cherished or feeling adored. We soaked in, feeling like, oh, it's a safe and comfortable world here in this place to which I was born. Or we soaked in wondering if it's a safe and comfortable world here, the place to which I was born. We might have been soaking in the angst of a family system or a historical time in the life that we were born into. We might arrive into a family system that's overwhelmed or depleted or struggling, and so we soak in that too for our senses. So in the earliest phase of our lives, when our senses are so open, what we're soaking in is giving us what we call sense impressions in yoga. And these sense impressions kind of reside in the manomaya kosha. And so considering that the manomaya kosha was patterned for you before you came into your own awareness of it, sometimes what is happening is that earliest pattern is triggering today's actions, thoughts, behaviors, and reactions. This is one of the beauties of a practice like meditation. It pierces through those patterns, internalized, adopted, unknowingly soaked in those patterns. We pierce through those patterns with meditation. And that piercing through lets us gaze more inward towards what is more deeply true and what is already whole and grounded. So Vijnanamaya kosha and Anandamaya kosha. So let me talk for a few minutes about how this works in terms of like the science of the koshas. So most people are oriented to the koshas from the outside in. So I'm going to describe it in that way first, so you can try to have a sense of where is innermost. And then I'd like to describe it from the innermost coming back out. So in the outer body, we call this thing, this muscle and bone body, which is, by the way, dependent upon food and comprised of food and becomes food. This body is called the annamaya kosha. The word anna, A-N-N-A, means food. And so we say in Ayurveda, the food you eat is the food that you become. And so I'm going to give you a sense of that. The food you eat is the food that you become, even for the mosquitoes, right? They find you to be food. So not only is the food you eat the food you become in terms of your physical body, but you're on the food chain. Just a gentle reminder there that you're on the food chain.
Sarah Joy, just a quick question, please.
Yeah.
Kosha is a body?
Kosha means sheath. It's like a sheath or a layer. It's I sometimes do use the word, this is the food body, this is the energy body, this is the mental body, but the word kosha actually translates as sheath or layer. Yeah. So the layer of the physical body is called annamaya kosha, and it's related to food. Now, it's not to say that we're going to become highly distracted about or scrutinizing about our diet. That isn't why we talk about the annamaya kosha at this level. This is the physical body, and what's important to know about it at this juncture of our conversation is it's the most dense of these layers of who we are. And being as dense as it is, it's the least likely to change and takes the longest period of time to change. So keeping in mind the physical body is the outer layer. The next layer in is called the pranamaya kosha. The word prana related to pranayama. Prana means life force. So the pranamaya kosha is the body of energy. It is that which lights you up. It includes your respiration and your innervation. It includes the subtle movement of fluid through the body, and also includes things like your dosha and the marma points and the way that pranayama can align the system of the subtle body from the inside. So the pranamaya kosha is considered less dense than the annamaya kosha, and also has elements of the subtle. So it's called a dense and subtle body mixed together. And then the manomaya kosha is more inward than that. And this is purely a subtle body, the manomaya kosha. You might feel like your mind is dense sometimes, or you might think other people's minds are dense, or it's like a dense jungle of thoughts and problems up there, or like a dense matrix to get through. But the manomaya kosha refers to your mind and your senses as being in the subtle body. So in the annamaya kosha, the practice associated with that is the practice of asana, the physical asana. The pranamaya kosha is pranayama. Manomaya kosha is meditation. So if we can take the physical practice of asana, and most people in the US, we are first introduced to yoga as an asana practice. In fact, they say, I'm going to yoga class. I say, you're going to asana class probably. Unless you're really going to yoga class, and you're probably going to asana class with some music by Aretha Franklin or somebody like that. But the asana has been a doorway for people to realize that there's something more to them than only their physical body. And they realize there's another way to feel in their physical body. There's another way to be in the body. And so even if it's just temporarily, the sense of self is enlarged. The sense of belonging can be accessed. And the sense of our mental Ferris wheel can be right-sized or diminished. So my hope is that if there is as there has been this huge renaissance of asana, 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 may it then guide people to pranayama. May they discover, oh, the breathing is really what I can carry with me anytime, anywhere. I cannot always do triangle pose. I cannot always do a handstand. Oh, but I can remember the breath. And may they be introduced to pranayama to feel how powerfully that is nourishing their body. Because most people are first interested in their body. Second, pranayama, may they feel the difference that it makes in the mind. And particularly, may then pranayama guide people to this inner state of meditation or meditative awareness. So even though yoga in the form of asana got hugely popular, there's very little, relatively little, compared to how much popularity, much fewer people know about pranayama or meditation. So I hope that we can change that. So the manomaya kosha is subtle, and it includes your senses and your mind, your mental habits, and those impressions that you got from soaking in whatever environment you were born into. Then inward to that is called vijnanamaya kosha, and this is the body of wisdom, of deep inner knowing, or the layer of wisdom, the layer of deep inner knowing. And then deeper than that is the anandamaya kosha, which is not subtle and not dense. It is called the causal body. The word is causal, Kausal. When I was a very new student of yoga, I read about the koshas, and I thought that the anandamaya kosha was the casual body, Casual. It is the causal body, Causal, causal. So really the model of the koshas starts at anandamaya kosha. And it's ananda that causes the other layers to come into being. So I very frequently use the analogy of if you toss a stone into the pond, the ripples go out like that. And so the stone being tossed, like this ananda, this form that you got to inhabit, it already came with a full package of ananda. You were already connected to that source. And ananda is considered bliss or joyfulness, the body of joy and bliss. I like to think of it as an unconditional sense of belonging, a felt sense of belonging here. My hope is that people do experience that from the asana class that they take, and that as they touch that deeper thing, it then moves them outwards through the koshas. So how that might look is when we sense this ananda, it naturally wants to ripple into or radiate into this kind of deep knowing, like a wisdom comes to us that we didn't previously think of as our wisdom. And somehow there it is, a kind of luminous sense of what the masters have been talking about or what the texts are pointing to. Like, oh, whoa. And so the marketplace of daily life seems to fade, and you're having this more luminous view. So if Anandamaya Kosha were unhindered, people would flow into Vijnanamaya Kosha, and the wisdom that we seek from our teachers, we would know as our own. It would also be wisdom within us. It wouldn't be limited to our teachers. It wouldn't be limited to a few people who are smart. It's a shared wisdom, not an intelligence or a smartness. When that wisdom flows next into the Manomaya Kosha, it updates the mind. So when we've made contact with that Vijnanamaya Kosha, when we're really resting in there, it's updating the mind from the inside. So it's kind of like cleaning the windows inside your home. You're going to see out more easily. You'll see the world as it is more easily. You'll see more clearly. Otherwise, if the windows are very dirty on the inside of the house, when you're looking out, you think that the world is dusty. It's always cloudy. It's always foggy here. It never clears up. The sky is so, it's fogged in. But when you're cleaning the windows from inside the home with this Vijnanamaya Kosha, the Manomaya Kosha gets to see more clearly. At this juncture is a dilemma that I have to talk about for a few minutes, because the earliest conditioning that any one of us had, we were soaking in that like a sponge, soaking in a certain dye. And I often use the example of if you were a sponge that was getting soaked in beet juice, red beet juice, you would be coming out of that dye in a kind of hot pink color. And that's soaked in at a certain level. So the earliest impressions are in the Manomaya Kosha. And we might mistake ourselves to be those impressions. The dilemma comes when we realize there is another view in life. There is a more clear perspective. I am not just the narrative that I've been telling myself or that was told to me about myself. I am not just that narrative. I am something I can't name, perhaps, but I don't have a word for it. But life is other than I thought it was. So in the Manomaya Kosha is a very sensitive place in our development, because as we see more clearly, the quandary that can come up is, how will I live in this society? How will I communicate in this sort of marketplace reality? How am I going to participate in my job or my relationships? Like people in the initial flush of, oh gosh, there's something more. I am not that which I thought I was. In that quandary, we have to be very sensitive and go slowly, because there's an opening up process, and we don't want to make abrupt or sudden decisions during that time. It also presents a quandary because sometimes the people with whom we have believed the narrative about ourselves, they are still believing that narrative about us. And we're trying to update our perspective, including our perspective of others is going to get updated. And so there can be a change in relationships. In our last Dharma talk, which was a week or so ago, one of the young students who was here was talking about going through some changes as a commitment. He's been having yoga in his life more and more. And as he practiced more yoga, he found that some of his friendships were not holding up so well because they weren't aligned with where he was growing, how he was growing through yoga. And so some of the friends were no longer being such connections for him. And that's a quandary that lots of us go through developmentally as we look more at the path that is spiritual and sacred and not so temporal or commercialized, in other words. Okay, so in that Manomaya Kosha, it's so sensitive that when we practice meditation, I recommend that you're practicing with the support of pranayama and asana, so that your meditation is so well tended to that you're not sitting there meditating, just getting more of the same mental trains going by. Like at the end of an hour of meditation, then you're just exhausted because all you had was the same ticker tape of information going by, going by, going by. In that situation, meditation might be a time where you're reinforcing rather than resolving. And so we do have the technologies of pranayama and asana to help us prepare for meditation. And that's where the outward practice of asana and then the inward practice of pranayama and then even more inward for meditation can be so helpful. So at the panchamaya kosha, let's just hold for a moment and I'll come back to this, that there's a fork in the road at the panchamaya kosha, and that fork in the road is there for all of us. I shall return to it. So if the mind is clear and you've cleaned the windows of the house and you're gazing out and seeing the world more as it is, when you get to the panchamaya kosha, there'll be less resistance. There's less residue on your subtle body. There are fewer, let's say, trigger points in the body or fewer areas of congestion. You're less susceptible to reactivity in the nervous system. You're likely to experience your limbic brain and your lizard brain sort of turning on when a verified need is there, but you're not living from fight or flight, freeze, or collapse. You'll be living more from we call it today like a regulated nervous system. You'll be living from a regulated system. I'm not particularly fond of this sense that you've regulated your system, because our systems are always co-regulating. We are co-regulating organisms. And I also find that the word regulating can feel kind of unkind at a certain level. It can feel a little bit like you've got to regulate yourself. And then there's this other word we call regulations, which is like an oversight of something. So I prefer this sense that the nervous system, when you arrive with a clear mind, the nervous system is able to be co-regulated with nature. You're really sensing the rhythms of nature and life, and not as much the rhythm of the marketplace again of the mind. So in that sense, you're co-regulating with nature. You'll sense when you're hungry, when you're tired, when you're energized, when you're sleepy, when you have a need for connection, when you have a need for solitude. You'll sense that through your subtle body. You'll sense when your dosha is going out of balance, and you'll sense that reaching for the popcorn is probably not the thing to bring your dosha back into balance. You'll sense yourself and some of those patterns that you were using to medicate or regulate your nervous system in the absence of co-regulation. In the absence of healthy co-regulation, we're all likely to get a bit discombobulated, and then we'll reach for things that we're actually trying to medicate our system. And that process starts when you're very, very young. So your nervous system was born into a co-regulating search. You came out of the womb seeking that reciprocity and mutuality and the co-rhythmic experience of nature in the form of humans. You came out of the womb like that. And so whatever you were then simmering in this earliest life, your nervous system got this pattern for how to simmer. And if there was a simmer that was painful for you, but no co-regulation was available, you had to find something else to medicate that pain. Things like cartoons or sugary cereals, or adulthood might be food and TV, or other ways that you would escape the pain of or the discomfort of that dysregulation in your environment. And so for lots of us to overcome behavior patterns, they're lifelong embedded patterns that need a certain quality of meditation, pranayama, and asana to help us to overcome. So let's say the pranamaya kosha is then going to flow into the annamaya kosha, the physical body. And that's where you see your behavior patterns, because they play themselves out right there, like reaching for the popcorn or popping open a beer or turning on the remote. Those are physical actions that you can actually see. You see yourself doing those things. So that becomes more obvious. And sometimes they want to change those behaviors, but we have to address the pranamaya kosha and the manomaya kosha to really affect the transformation. And most of all, to influence the manomaya kosha to clear the windows so we can see more clearly. The gnanamaya and anandamaya kosha are also in us. So the fork in the road I mentioned, I'll come back to that now, and then I'd like to hear what your questions are. The fork in the road, many times people feel like, which way do I go when I feel distressed, when I get confused, which way do I go? The panchamaya kosha is the middle of these 5 layers. So it's annamaya, pranamaya, manomaya, vijnanamaya, anandamaya kosha. So it's the middle of these layers. So if you go to the panchamaya kosha, you could ask now, do I want to go more inward towards vijnanamaya and anandamaya kosha? How do I get back there? What tools, what empathy, what connection, what resources do I need to go into that? Or the mind is distressed and you can ask, do I want to go outwards? Do I want to find the solution, quote unquote, outside of myself? And because we are by nature foragers, we do tend to forage to get our needs met. We do tend to go out often to get our needs met. Even if we're a person who's more introverted, we can tend to forage inside for what am I going to do to meet these needs. And it might not be that we're going really deeply in. So don't misinterpret extrovert, introvert, going out, going in. I don't mean it in that way. When I'm pointing to going inward, I really mean to the deeper realms of vijnanamaya and anandamaya kosha. So this is my experience then. When people come into distress in the level of the mind, it's very difficult for them to let that go, to drop that even temporarily, to remember the indwelling self that is not currently in distress, the indwelling self that has not been harmed, the inner self that isn't broken, the inner self that already belongs. It's very challenging for people for all of us in our species, to release the manomaya, pranamaya, and annamaya kosha and just go back home to anandamaya kosha. In an embodied way. I don't mean like dissociation here. It's very challenging for us to go there because we also have a story. The story is, if I work it all out, if I work out all of my problems, my character flaws, if I just dissect the problems that I am and that I keep creating, if I work it all out, then I will feel that kind of home ground. And that story keeps us really preoccupied. It also makes us good consumers to be marketed to buy things. So it's tied into the post-industrialized society that we're living in. For those of us who are living in that way, more industrialized versus indigenous, we become more susceptible to being marketed to. If we have the story, I have to work it all out. Once I get it all settled, I will then get to experience that relief or that awakening. Is this making sense? Feels familiar? So really, in a way, yoga is like an incredible surrender, because it's asking us not to need to work it all out before we experience anandamaya kosha. And every time we come to our mat, yoga gives us a pathway, asana, pranayama, meditation, asana, pranayama, meditation, again and again, some chanting, all the things. It's giving us a gateway to pierce through the stories and to come back home. From that place of home, I can assure you, after almost 30 years of working with individuals recovering from addiction and anxiety and PTSD, from that place of home, how you look at the narrative and the events of your life is so much more loving and compassionate and wise. It will ultimately expedite your healing to take this route from yoga's recommendation. Surrender the narrative for a time, go to the practices, cultivate the inner realm, and then you'll have cleaned the windows of your home. And as you take stock of and look at things, resolving the problematic aspects of who you are will be much more natural and easeful to do. I'm quoting Christopher Titmuss, who's a Buddhist teacher, when he said that really life requires us not only to love that which is, but to resolve the problematic aspects of what is. And that is a dedication for the individual, but also for the society. So the surrender is at the manomaya kosha. You're at this fork in the road. I'm in distress. What am I going to do? I'm going to attack my distress. I'm going to, sort it out. I'm going to do the things in the external sense of what I can do. Maybe I'll change my environment. Maybe I'll change my food. Maybe I'll change the conversation. I'll call somebody. I'll go for a walk. I'll turn on TikTok, or I guess you don't turn that on. You go to the app. Like turning on a TV is different. You know, all those things that can end up actually being, we're seeking relief. Of course, we're seeking relief. But seeking relief is different than honing our attention towards resolution. And the deep resolve is to know our inner self, capital S. And then to look at these, like, use the side mirror to see what needs to be resolved in your life. So just to clarify, in no way am I recommending any kind of spiritual bypassing or dissociating. This is a deep dive to knowing the inner self as a way to then address the self that you are. This is your personality self. So let me pause there and see what questions you have. Questions or reflections, or just comments if you have some. Yes, Stevie. Yeah. She wrote in the chat, such a revolutionary journey. And in a way, Stevie, the word revolutionary, it is like a revolution against the dominant societal ways. It is a rebellion against that in some ways, because we're going to drop this. The mindset that we have about working it all out before we get to have ease is very tied to the economic pursuit of our dominant culture. And so when Stevie says revolution, then she wrote exactly, exclamation point, exclamation point. It is a revolution against that, right? And so we can take that to heart. Stevie, thank you for your comment there. Let's go to Edward.
Thank you. Sarah Joy, may I ask you a big Dharma question that's been brewing?
I suppose.
Okay, it's a two-part question. It's a big one. First, I'll give you the context. If we were a group of traditionalists living in India, we might be practicing yoga for the purpose of uniting, aka yoga, with a Brahma or a Krishna, depending on the region we lived on in our studies. So, but we are living in a modern context, and I sense that the majority of us living here in the West are not Hindus living in that traditional context. So as a primary purpose of the practice of yoga is unity, aka yoga, what are we uniting with in our current circumstance?
Yes, well, you're uniting with the same thing that has been uniting us since time immemorial. I would call it consciousness or grace or spirit. And so it need not have a name specifically. Some people, of course, do have a name for that. They might have a deity or a god or a presence to which they feel this communion or this prayer for uniting. However, I sense in the states of awakening that can come with yoga that which we're connecting to need not take on any one form or name specifically, that it infuses. And my other sense is that the saints and mystics that we have been so fortunate to see, even in our lifetime, or in this relatively recent span of 100 years, they too were connecting to that, whatever tradition or lineage or religion they came from. So that's my sense of it. I hope that's somewhat helpful.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I wanted to get your point of view on that. And the second part of the question is, being that we're working with modern people in our modern context, what are the practical applications of unity?
Well, I think the most practical application that comes to mind for me is to see everyone and everything as our own, to recognize that each of us is a part of the whole, and we're not separate from one another, in the sense that my actions have an influence on others. And my actions I'm in a relatively privileged society, and I have a certain level of privilege in my society. So I have a responsibility to see how my actions from a place of privilege are influencing others, perhaps causing harm or causing some betterment for society. So if I know myself to be interconnected with all that is, then I know that where I make my purchases from and how I use the resources that I have will influence where those resources are coming from. And for example, perhaps some of you know or don't know this, the cobalt that makes up our devices, these slippery, slick, beautiful phones that we have, that cobalt is in such high demand that the one most prolific place for it to be accessed on this planet is on, I think it's on the African continent. And those who go into the mines to get the cobalt are children and teenagers, and sometimes mothers and fathers. They're all there digging in the mines, including the children, because they're all there trying to help get a few pennies for the day to get some food for their family. It's a very devastating circumstance to realize what causes your phone to even be a phone. What do you need? And the cobalt is one of the essential minerals that's involved in that. And so I think, how long can I keep this one phone that I have now? Can I take good care of it? Can I prevent it from, breaking? Can I just not convenience up to the next model? Can I stick with this one? And some people were canvassing my neighborhood a few days ago, and I signed the petition that in Oregon, we're about to have, there's a law on the books coming up in a couple months for the right to repair your own devices. The right to repair. And if you live in Southern Oregon, you got to pay attention, because that's where they're trying to get the one last vote is to come from places not in Portland. The legislators here are already in agreement, but they have to get the whole vote to pass, and they need one more vote. And they told me Southern Oregon is like a tipping point. So I'm telling Sadie that. So Edward, knowing something like that, you asked about the pragmatic application. I'm aware that when I use my phone, and sometimes it's hard to live in such a constantly aware way, but I'm aware today because I watched this discussion on the climate and cobalt with these journalists. I'm aware that when I pick up this phone, the children in mines in a part of the world I'll never go to, because I'm not planning to be in that direct spot, but children in those mines help to get the cobalt out of the earth. And I'm just casually texting my sister today. They are exposed to toxicity and chemicals, and their health is poor, and their lifespan will be short, and the quality of their life is one of being exploited. So I take this in a tender-hearted way, Edward, and I ask myself, well, what can I do? I could raise awareness. I can't likely go up against the system, but I could raise awareness that this is what we're facing. So now I am a bit unique in this regard. In the tradition of yoga, there is a path of yoga called karma yoga, the yoga of action. And I translate that to also be the yoga of advocacy and raising awareness. But in a very classical sense, you might translate that the pursuit of yoga is for the individual to awaken, and they would transcend society. So keeping that in mind, that there are translations, and I'm speaking from my contemporary lived experience as an American-born person who's been dedicated to yoga for some 35 years. But I am not speaking of the classical text when I say this about raising awareness and taking action like this. It's not prohibited, but it's not written in the text that you should then take action like this. The actions in the Bhagavad Gita are about the mind, one's own mind. So let me go to Sadie, who also raised her hand. Thank you, Edward. I always appreciate your questions.
Thanks, Sarah Joy. Hi, everybody. My question was about the 3 innermost koshas, and it's kind of a two-parter. My first question is, could we consider the panchamaya kosha like the little s self, and ananda like the big S self? That's the first question. And
yes, be careful when you say big S. In English, it sounds like you're saying big ass self. I try to say capital S self and small s self, something like that. Small self or larger self. Just a recommendation as a yoga teacher, you might try Broadening your vocabulary on that one.
Thank you. Capital S self. And the second question is, could you talk a little bit more about Vijnanamaya kosha?
Yeah. Okay, so the koshas come from a text called the Upanishads. And the teachings on classical yoga and the mind come from the Yoga Sutras. So there are 3 layers of mind: the manas, ahankara, and buddhi. So manas is the animal mind, ahankara is the ego mind, and buddhi is the intellectual or intelligence mind. So if we place the manas on the manamaya kosha, like if these were rings around a planet, this is the moon on the manas, manamaya kosha, this is the little moon there. And then you would put ahankara between the manas, between manamaya kosha and vijnanamaya kosha. It'd be like hovering there between those two. The self that knows itself is different than the self that doesn't know itself. But ahankara is ego. It's a part of the structure of who we are to operate ourselves in this life. We have a sense of the ahankara, the ego. And it's my understanding that we don't need to abolish it or destroy it or incinerate it or overcome it, but can we understand its function and be in right relationship with it? So from the manamaya kosha, this little space between there and the vijnanamaya kosha, there sits your ahankara. And then this buddhi, or the intellectual knowledge, the intelligence principle, sits more at the vijnanamaya kosha. If I was to place those on top of this, and this is taking a classical text and using the Upanishads together at the same time. So the manas and the manamaya kosha are more like the animal mind. So we could say, yes, more like the small s self, the small self. The journey through Vijnanamaya kosha on this way back home to Anandamaya kosha, yes, it is like the self beyond all self. It is the realm that some would call no self. For example, in Advaita Vedanta, it would be the realm of no self, no separateness, no separate self. Not even self, beyond that, beyond the beyond. So I hope that's answering your question. The Vijnanamaya kosha is, as Eknath Eswaran was describing, it's like this held wisdom that crosses cultures, traditions, and time and space. We might think of it as when we have a sense of compassion or grace arising spontaneously towards someone who's in pain, that would be like a universal human capacity in the Vijnanamaya kosha. We might also read about that, and that would be like book knowledge, but the felt sense of it coming through us is like Vijnanamaya kosha. Or the recognition as we start to sense like, oh, there is this supreme reality, not the one that I'm living in daily life and getting distracted by, but there's this other supreme reality. Whoa. When you're touching that, you're touching into Vijnanamaya kosha. And it's not limited only to people who practice yoga. These koshas are for everyone. It's just that this is one model of talking about the human experience. So other traditions have ways of accessing that knowledge or that wisdom. They have other means to get there or to remember it. Many times in those traditions, I'm thinking of some of the tribal traditions on the continent of Africa, actually, where there's tribal rituals. It's a group process. There is a collective process of touching that. And they have different means of getting there in the native population on this continent, different ways to touch that. And again, a group process that might be involved. So yoga may look like an individual path to this destination, but the koshas are universal. They don't belong to yoga. They just got codified by yoga. They got named here. I hope that's somewhat helpful. Yes, Karen. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for all those questions. They've really, it's been helpful to listen to your responses to all of those, to add to everything. What I want to share is a reflection. First of all, I want to say that I did travel 45 hours to get here at the beginning of my trip due to storms. And I was actually writing in a journal, and I said, oh, Sarah Joy would say, I'm hither and thither. I was like all over the place with having to get a hotel and having to do this and sitting on planes and 8 hours in an air, it was just, but there was something that was very grounding about the experience. And as I reflect right now, I think it is because of the practice that I have with you and with my yoga over many years, that there was this deep sense of groundedness through the hither and thither. So I was finding an integration that I might not have found at other times in my life. And when I did break down, a couple times I just was flooded with emotion, and I just was accepting of myself for the tears as well as my resourced abilities to get through the challenges that were happening. So I think I'm just seeing the integration of that as a reflection of what you're talking about this evening. The other part of this is I'm living in a very small little room here at my mother's apartment in a senior living complex. My mom is 94 years old and is struggling with some minor health issues, but they're major in her life. Her eye is she's having a corneal erosion in her eye, which is quite challenging. And we had a procedure last week. But I'm witnessing in front of my own eyes the layers of my mother that have taught me that what's important in life is to fix it, to work it all out, to do all of these things, and to be in control of how everything is orchestrated. And I am seeing myself through that lens of how I was raised. And I think you spoke about that in the co-regulating and what we're searching for from the time that we're, born. It's like all of a sudden this clarity is emerging of how I was raised, and it's really been enlightening to see this. And the practice of going inward and doing yoga and coming to my room and doing my meditation. Believe me, it's really easy to just sit with her and watch TV, which I do sometimes because that's all she does. And so I have to pull myself from the TV and from wanting to have ice cream and all these things. It's just, I don't know, everything you've spoken about, I've heard so much over the years about all the koshas, but there's something about tonight that has helped me to really integrate where I find myself at this space and time. And so those are my reflections at this point.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I have two reflections back. Can I offer them to you?
Yes, please.
One is that, when you're traveling like that for 45 hours and you have to go hither and thither and so on, perhaps the crying is just this physiological overwhelm. You're not in any natural environment there. You're in airports and traffic and, so you're not being rhythmically co-regulated with nature. You're getting exposed to the technologies of life, the industrialization of life. And so like sometimes a 3-year-old is so physiologically overwhelmed at the grocery store, it starts crying in the aisle. You might have just been physiologically ready for a meltdown and you had to let the tears come out.
That's right.
I recommend adding no extra narrative to it, just allowing it to be, that's what's happening right there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. The second thing I'd like to suggest is your mom is 94, as you said, and every time we practice yoga, we are practicing also shavasana, which is a practice of recognizing our finite nature. It's also called the corpse pose in English.
Yeah.
Every time we practice, we are touching that which is finite and actually fleeting, temporary. And we're given this chance to surrender in shavasana every single time. So I recommend that we practice shavasana as that kind of surrender, so that when we then sit back up to go about our daily lives, whether we're addressing a health concern or going to a surgery or advocating for the right to repair our own phones, which I'm now on board with because the guy came to the house, I signed the thing. Whenever we're doing that, then we're also doing it not with the illusion that we're going to have control. We're doing it because we're compelled to do the next intelligent thing, but not with any idea that we're going to be able to control the outcome. This is also one of the teachings of yoga from the Bhagavad Gita. We, as they say, we have a right to our actions, but we don't have a right to own the fruits of our actions. We can act, but we don't have control over how the actions turn out. So we do the next intelligent thing because nature would do that too. We do the next it's not like a passivity comes over us. Shavasana doesn't teach us how to be passive. It teaches us how to live. How to really take to heart what this life is.
I love that.
What can happen when your mom has now had 9 decades, it sounds like, of trying to fix and have some control. So that pattern probably won't change before her body leaves. She leaves this form. And it can become more and more scary when you have what you call the minor health dilemma is bigger for her.
Yeah.
Perhaps she's been successful for 9 decades at, controlling some of those things, and now she'll have less control.
Yeah.
So I recommend that we practice this surrender thing well before we're into the parts of our life where our mind becomes less flexible, and we try to stay the course of control and fixing things. I recommend that we practice the surrender much sooner on, because it does help us to live in alignment with reality. My oldest yoga student, in terms of biological age, she comes to my house once a week for yoga. Her name will be secret to her because she doesn't want it to be known what her age is. So if I tell you her name and I tell you her age, I'll be breaking her promise to her. She's 92 years old.
Wow.
She came to do yoga today, right? And every time she gets down and up from the floor, she says, it's so good for me to get up and down from the floor. I got to keep doing this. But she's also living in relationship with yoga and with reality. So I share this with Karen.
Thank you. Yeah, very helpful.
Okay, let's go to Devika.
I sort of lost my chain of thought with all the conversation that we were having, but let me try to find what I was trying to say.
Wonderful.
Or ask or seek. Meditation has always been one thing that I have run away from, or I'm afraid of. Every time I start to do it, it makes me more anxious or more restless. And I know there is a point where you cross over and then go on to the other side, that as I see, where you get what you are supposed to get from meditation, the centering, the calm, the surrender. My difficulty is I have rarely been able to cross over, and I feel the urge to give up, even before I have gone there, because every time, sometimes it takes different amount of time every time, several minutes or more to reach to the other side, where I just want to be here and now and not worry about anything else or any other thoughts, and I'm able to bring myself back. But I feel the urge to give up, and I want to know if I am not able to hold on and move on and continue and not give up, how am I going to turn out to be a teacher and teach someone else to have faith and continue to do it and not give up? And that it's not really difficult, but it's just in here, that you need to train. I don't have the exact words, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
I think I'm getting what you're conveying. Yeah. So meditation, I do think it's very challenging if we just try to start there, like just dropping into the manamaya kosha and then vijnanamaya kosha, anandamaya kosha. It's very hard. At the Manamaya Kosha, we associate the practice of meditation, but the first thing is that the mind has to be able to concentrate. Concentration for the human mind is sometimes like as if you were asking a frog to concentrate. The frog is bouncing all over the place. It's not concentrating. If you ask the kitten to concentrate, it's not concentrating. So the human mind can be like that when we say, okay, let's go meditate now. Let's concentrate to get to meditation, because concentration precedes meditation. So if we're going to help the mind to be able to concentrate, there are things that we can do with pranayama to elicit a state of concentration for the mind and to quiet the mental broadcasts into the background of our mental noise. It fades. So pranayama can be very helpful in this regard. What asana practice makes it easier for us to practice pranayama because the body is more receptive. And in asana practice, we're kind of organizing the 5 pranas in the body. So apana, samana, dhyana, udana, and pranavayu get more organized. And then how we experience pranayama is easier. So that's why sometimes we look at the kosha model as an outside-in journey, the asana, then the pranayama, then the meditation. But another interesting thing to consider, Devika, is if we want to be able to meditate and we know that the mind is also governed by some of the physiology of the body, we look at, well, how am I sleeping? How am I eating? What is my daily routine? How do I organize my life so that I can actually meditate versus maybe we have a chaotic life and then we get to the cushion and we're like suffering, struggling. We think, oh, I can't meditate. I'm failing at this. Which might unfortunately reinforce a perspective about ourselves that I can't do it and I'm failing at it. So I smiled with your question, Devika, because I'm looking forward to the joy you might experience with pranayama to have the gateway into meditation.
And probably that's the, I wouldn't say a mistake, but that's just been a different way. I would always start with the pranayama, consider that you wake up and you do your pranayama, and then get into your asana. Maybe I need to switch it up and see if that helps, because I find myself even giving up on pranayama because I know I want to do the sequence, the breathing, the anulom vilom, the brahmari, the kapalbharati, all of those things. And I find myself sometimes stressed out instead of relaxed because I'm so hard that I could not do it. It's supposed to be relaxing, but I'm not able to relax.
Yeah.
But maybe now that I have the new information, like if I start with asana and then try to do the pranayama, maybe that's going to be more helpful for me. And I would give that a try.
Yes, and in some stages of development, I'm going to mute you for a moment there, Devika, because we got an echo. Here we go. Okay, great. By the way, I keep waving my hand like this because this is a motion censored light that I'm turning on while I'm here. Let me see if this will make a difference. No, that light's not plugged in. Okay. So, Devika, in a certain stage of our development as yogis, it is helpful to have asana before pranayama because we are carving out the pathway in the body for prana to be organized, and then pranayama is easier. We're not trying to use the technologies of pranayama to overcome disorganized prana in the body. As we get further down the pathway of yoga, the pranayama, we recognize its great power, and we may start our practice there. So the question isn't which one comes first. The question is, what stage of development am I in? And also, I would say it's important. So we have these 5 koshas. Outside of the koshas, we have our daily life. So if how I'm sleeping or eating or working or socializing is maybe more rajasic or more tamasic, it's causing my body to have like disorganized energy or loss of energy. So I'm rajasic or tamasic when I go to my yoga mat. If I'm really rajasic, pranayama is going to feel challenging. Like, no, wait, I want to move my body. This is not doing it. This is not enough. I need to be more vigorous. And so Rajas is like, let me move some. If we get there and we're more tamasic, we'll be like, pranayama isn't very effective. It's doing nothing. Because our tamasic body, like it becomes dull and lethargic, and it's hard to get it to feel the subtlety of the pranayama. So we all have this question also of how we live our life. What are we doing in the life off the cushion or off the mat that we're bringing to the cushion or to the mat that might be making it hard to do pranayama or to do meditation? And before we come into any black and white thinking about this, you guys, I would not, as your teacher, ask you to change your whole life to make it possible to meditate. But I would ask us to reflect on the things that we could change to give ourselves a better chance at meditation, because we don't want to just swim in the annamaya, pranamaya kosha of society and then realize we missed the chance to be in the vijnanamaya or the anandamaya, to be in that realm and to know it. We are not separate from those koshas, but to know that we are there is the joy of the yoga practice, the yoga path. Does that make sense, Davika? Okay, thank you. I saw your chat there also in the comment. Yeah. And CV said, it's like you're able to take a step back as Krishna, able to see the full view instead of stuck in the moment as Arjuna. Yeah, that was back a little bit in our time, but I missed the comment when it came up earlier. But yeah, so that is helpful, Stevie, to think of. There's this Krishna or higher knowing or wise presence, and then there we are. We are the Arjuna on the battlefield, and we're telling our teacher, I can't meditate, or I can't take this action, or I can't do this, and he keeps saying, well, actually, it's your duty to do these things. So I like to say, since we have taken this form, the human form, and we have an interest and inclination to yoga, we have a duty to learn how to meditate, because billions of people are never going to meditate. So we need a small percentage of us to be meditating. We need each other as like a life raft also. So yeah. Thank you so much for your questions and your comments tonight. So it's very refreshing. And what I'd like to do is sit for a few minutes of quiet together before we close for the evening. So please come back into your comfortable seat, whatever you know that to be. And you can rest your hands in your lap if that's comfortable, or one hand on the heart perhaps. And then begin listening, sensing. And turn down the volume on the narrative you tell yourself about yourself, and raise the volume on that larger awareness or larger presence. And then you can imagine that each other person in our gathering is also lowering the volume on their narrative and raising the volume on that larger presence. Were we to be together, we would have a felt sense of this as our shared presence. In physical space, it's a kind of palpable, felt sense. So imagine yourself feeling that felt sense of our shared presence. And then please raise your hands to your heart. Thank you so much for sharing this time together. It's an honor to be with you. Namaste. Thank you to the East Coast for staying up extra late. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and good sleep also. Good night.